Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Flame. Now, this time we are talking all about context switching and flipping between that grill. Sometimes context switching is always seen as a good thing. Most of the time it's not. So we're going to talk about how to spot it and stop it. So Ed, when was the last time that you think you context switched?
Literally right before this podcast. So I was in Jira looking at some issues. Then I had to go over to Slack because I had some questions that I wanted to get to directly to a person. And then I had to get on a Zoom to go to a meeting. So by that time, after the meeting, I forgot what I was working on in Jira. So yeah,
Yeah, so
so we're
literally every
always doing it.
day.
Yeah.
We are. I mean, there was some research I was actually reading up on for this episode, which I didn't realize. So there was a study done by I think it's UC Irvine, where it talks about like it takes 23 minutes on average to refocus on a project that you were working on before the moment you've context switched.
23 minutes. Dude, at my age, it's more like 53 minutes.
Does that also depend on how much barbecue that you've eaten, though?
That is true. That is true.
Yeah. So, I mean, the 23 minutes every single time that you have to context switch, if you're context switching between meetings, meeting notes,
Yeah.
going and checking API documentation, that builds up. And the cumulative effort, which I think is quite staggering, is that it's about a loss of about 2 to 4 hours a day. So
It's amazing we get anything done.
exactly, right? So you're
constantly
breaking
context
down.
switching. Yeah.
Exactly, right? So we've got an 8-hour day. You lose, on average, up to half of that day just context switching. You have an hour for lunch. So actually, your productive time is only kind of between 2 to 3 hours a day anyway,
Yeah.
which is incredibly small compared to how much time that we actually put into the pot. So I think that from that kind of tell, it's kind of no wonder that we also find ourselves moving more into the world of burnout, where that context switching actually doesn't allow us to do any vital work. We seem to be always busy, but actually never achieving anything, and that's having a real effect on people.
Yeah. It's like, all that context switching. I don't know about you, Dan, but sometimes I will go on my calendar and just put focus time for like 3 hours because I just need to dive in deep on something that I'm working on, right? I got to focus. I got to knock it out. I got to, be all in. And I can't do that if I'm having to answer Slack or go to a meeting or anything like that. So it's like getting that deep work as well.
Yeah, and there's one of my good friends in the ecosystem actually. They say that every time that our phones are built to give us a level of dopamine, we always get excited when that phone notifies, goes off, or Slack, whatever, and it immediately diverts our attention away from whatever we're currently doing. And that is the exact same principle that we're seeing with context switching in work terms. If we get a notification, our interest spikes, we want to go look, but now we are completely pulled out of what we were doing.
Yeah.
So like
oh
a
my
personal
God, Dan just slacked me. I got to go reply right now.
Exactly, right? And sometimes that's really useful. I mean, I love it when you do because, heart and all. But, there's a huge amount of hit there. But the effect on you is going to take you half an hour to kind of refocus back into what you were doing to a point where you're actually productive enough.
Yeah.
So it's a mad hit. So again, simple thing, like you said, turn off Slack, mute your emails, delete the things that are kind of distracting you and give yourself some focus time.
Yeah. Focus time, literally blocking it on your calendar is how I do it, just so no meetings can be made. And I know that I can do some deep work and I don't have to pay attention to anything else. To me, that's probably one of the best hacks that I've done recently.
Okay. See? There you go. Ed hack number 1. You'll get a few from today. I am sure of you. But I want to kind of think about kind of what that might look like in terms of real world, and maybe how it's sometimes difficult for either leaders or individuals to make the assessment of when am I being forced to context switch, and is there a value between what I was doing versus what I am now having to do. So I think the easiest one to look at is an incident.
Yeah.
We see them day in, day out. They happen. That's the world of technology, right? So an alert goes off at 2 p.m. Ed, what would you, if you're the engineer and that alerts come to you, what were the typical things that you might end up having to do?
Yeah, well, typically, if you're gonna have some kind of monitoring, and you're gonna get an alert. So how do I get that alert? Is it on Slack? Is it phone?
Mm,
Whatever context I'm getting that alert in, immediately I'm gonna be like, oh, now I have to evaluate, is this, DEFCON 6, or, is it, something that is not super crazy important. But then I'm gonna start researching, like, okay, what happened. So now I'm about to jump into, which system did that alert happen in. Now I got to go in and start looking into that system, and trying to figure out what the issue is, right? And then I may have to pull in other people from that perspective. So yeah, so it's going to be
yeah.
start doing some analysis, and then I'm going to be jumping back and forth between communicating with the impacted people, plus trying to figure out what's going on. So, there's going to be a lot of context switching from that perspective.
Exactly right. So you're checking Confluence for run books. You're slacking other people because you need to bring in other developers. Maybe someone from DevOps. Maybe someone from the other product areas because it's
Yeah.
affected multiple. So if we take the consideration that you've now got 4 people derailed from what they were doing. You were doing another software engineering task. I was doing another software engineering task. We're all pulled into that incident. And let's say that this one incident took 3 hours worth of time to resolve. You've derailed 4 people. That's 12 hours of lost time. Now, to a business, they might go, "That's great. We resolved the incident within our time. It derailed for 12 hours worth of productive time, but if we didn't resolve it, it could have been worse." However, there's a trade-off there of
Yeah.
in incidents, it might be worth it. In some cases, it really also might not be worth it. It might just be something you resolve
Yeah.
later.
So we met our SLA on resolution, but it still cost us more from a resource perspective. Kind of, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, maybe if we think about better active alert monitoring or automated handling of that said task, maybe it was just it ran out of memory. You could easily automate that task to boost memory or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
There's more simple tasks that we might be able to get away with that, again, do not distract individuals, have automated, and then kind of never see the light of day.
Yeah. Service requests tickets. They have probably some of the highest form of context switching. And if we're able to automate some of that, and make them more efficient, to reduce the amount of resource allocations that are needed to address those,
Yeah.
I think it's a win-win.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think one of the things that we mentioned so far is when we think about knowledge, right? We might have to go to Confluence, we might have to go to our monitoring tool, we might have to go even check internet and do some research, like you said, depending
Yeah.
on what's gone on. Now, in my head, uh, all of that different context switching, even just in terms of research and knowledge, like having lots of tools siloed away, hard to kind of find, that's going to surely be one of the biggest time wasting in this particular example.
Yeah. Yeah. Whether it's knowledge base context switching or tool base. So like I said, before this podcast, I was switching between Slack and Zoom and Jira and Confluence, and so those are all separate tools that I'm using to figure out what needs to be done, or organize my work from that perspective. So that is kind of a classic tool silo, right?
Yeah.
Just jumping in between these different tools, kind of things, and then your knowledge based ones, could be different Confluence instances, or you may have some. In our case at Appfire, obviously we have product documentation that are in different Confluence instances that we need to make sure are up to date, and we can
Mm.
reference if we are solutioning a solution, solutioning a solution. That's what is that? A double entendre? I don't know. Ignore that. But if we are figuring out a solution to one of our apps,
Yeah.
we there's several different places that we tend to have to go look, kind of thing. And again, that's kind of a knowledge base silo.
Well, exactly that, right? So the on average is about 130 different SaaS applications that an enterprise will use, a large enterprise. First of all, that's way too many. Probably don't need that many. I can almost guarantee you probably don't need that many. But every moment you're having to go, let's say you're into Confluence to search for this, then you've got to go into SharePoint because you need to research some of this, then you've got to go into
Yeah.
Slack and see maybe that you and I have had a conversation on some particular product documentation before. These are all different places that you would have to search every time you want to resolve something.
Yeah, and it's some of its applications that we sometimes don't use a lot. So, like marketing uses Figma a lot, right? So, those
Yeah.
130 plus SaaS applications add up across all your system areas. So marketing is using Figma plus this, and they're like, "Hey, Ed, go look at this Figma diagram and see if it makes sense." And I'm like, "How do you use Figma? What do I
Yeah,
do?" It's like, hold on.
exactly.
It's like,
So you're now having to relearn a tool just to find some information. And even on that, which is like if you and I structure our information differently,
yeah,
that in itself is another problem because now unstructured information in unfamiliar ways, you have to relearn and understand what that person might have been meaning. So this is where understanding your tool set, creating processes and defining, saying like Confluence is always product documentation, SharePoint is always team information, for
mhm,
example. So you're bucketing and categorizing what goes in them and then templatizing things so that everything becomes uniform. These are
yes.
huge wins, not only for us but also for AI, because then it can understand and replicate that information much quicker.
Absolutely. That is always easier said than done. But that's the cost of making things more efficient, is to get that to that standardization and templatized formats that make it easier for humans and AI to
Yeah.
access that information.
Exactly. So, we've understand why siloed information is a problem. We understand that if we can understand better about what maybe goes in which particular tool, how that information should look, that's obviously going to speed us up. But kind of where does the role in AI kind of really then and kind of develop that power back to the user?
So personal experience, I'm into vibe coding, right?
Hmm.
And so as a vibe coder previously, years ago, or as a programmer in general, right? You would be working on in your IDE, your development environment, and then if need to figure out how to write a function, you would go look up the documentation for the programming language you were in. If you have a running test and hit an issue, you'd see the error, then you'd go to Stack Overflow or research how to find what that issue was, kind of thing. If you were writing an API for a specific application, you'd have to go reference the API documentation and make sure it's current. So there's a lot of, contextual
Mm.
switching from that perspective. So, but now, with AI and the integration of AI into a lot of these development environments like Cursor, I can sit in one place and do all of that. So I don't have to switch outside of my development environment. So I have the ability to complete a function program wise within the IDE and just ask it to complete the function. I can I use a MCP server, Context 7, that has all the up-to-date API documentations that I can reference to go, hey, give me the API information for this application, and I need to
Mm.
integrate that with my code and do it. So I have vastly reduced my context switching, at least from a vibe coding perspective, in that kind of a real world example.
Yeah, so I think that example there is about, rather than having siloed information, first of all, it's about collecting information. So
Yeah.
we've spoken in last episode, we've spoken in previous episodes about understanding what different knowledge sources that you have, about trying to collect those. And then in this case, you're sat in Cursor and you're chatting away and saying, okay, well, I got this particular API call wrong. What should I have put? And yes, you're context switching slightly because now you're moving to chat, but you're staying in a focused
Yes.
environment and the knowledge is being pushed to you rather than you having to pull it in,
Yep.
if that makes sense. Yeah?
Exactly. Exactly. And that has made me exponentially more efficient in that I know that and I can even kick off, a side project to go, hey, go research this API while I'm over here fixing this bug. And then when I get back over here, I can implement that API exponentially faster than if I addressed each one separately. Right. So
Yeah. Okay. So there's almost like a trust equation in this, which is actually, you need to the AI, whichever one you're using, needs to be able to present accurate enough information that you can trust it, and
Yep.
that you begin to build that form of relationship with the chat tool or whatever that is that you're doing. But also that you could easily hand off and say, okay, I need you to just go do that so I can refocus over here. And
Yes.
again, I'm not being context switched too much.
Yeah. Yeah. And the AIs have gotten so good from a technical perspective, from a programmatic. Hey, I'm programming in React or Java or Python, and I need to implement a Stripe API or something like that. They've gotten so good where it's like I don't really have to focus on them writing that code. It's
Mm.
more if I'm starting to do some edge case scenarios and I want to make sure that we test those correctly, kind of thing, where you kind of pay a little bit more attention to how it's being built out.
Yeah. So if we kind of put this back into the Atlassian ecosystem and think about maybe an example that we've got there, right? If I think the easiest one is always to start with support agents or trying to hand off and give it that level of kind of shifting left.
Yep.
Like in order to know your agent, or maybe the Rovo agent that you've created in Atlassian Cloud is working efficiently, you need to make sure that you've provided it with all the right knowledge information. So have you connected all the different sources of knowledge? I think that's obviously the big one. We spoke about that last time.
Less than the context. We're giving it the context.
Exactly, right? So
Yep.
it's able to pick up explicit and implicit context in terms of what's going on, is able to then analyze the information within the ticket in a form in a meaningful manner. So
Yep.
again, that's a huge thing. It would then, like I said, so it's identified maybe the problem, it's pulled in the right knowledge base articles, and then again, you might then say, okay, well, before I go and supply this information to the customer, I'm going to pull in a person, human in the loop, and say, this is going to be an issue. Here are the callouts that we are going to make. I am providing you with all the upfront knowledge so that you can then make decisions.
And and Rovo and AI is able to exponentially faster do that, because previously we may have had the support request come in and we see it's from customer XYZ, and then the reporting customer was whoever, and we like, okay, well, let me go see, has I don't know, Mickey Mouse was the requester, and let me go back and look and see, how many tickets has he opened, and what's his sentiment been like? Has he been frustrated with us? Has he been, super open to, different resolution options? So instead of manually going through and seeing, all that other context like history and sentiment and any pieces of the knowledge base, Rovo can just almost immediately pull all that together, right? And so again, we're not, from a human perspective, we're not context switching. We're having Rovo pull all that together and push it to us, and now we have that immediately from that support agent perspective.
So Ed, I actually think that perfectly fits in with kind of moving through. We've understood the downsides of context switching and how it's a problem for humans. We've understood about siloing information and how that's just going to multiply and have a profound effect on things. Even then providing AI to summarize and present information in this pushing knowledge to you where you want to work at the right time, at the right place. That's a profound effect. I am context switching, but far less the effect it has would be minuscule compared to what it would have been 10, 20, 30 years ago, right?
Oh, God, yeah.
Now, if we automate it, go on.
Yeah, no. So, on that point, when we're starting to automate some of this information. So again, in our service request example, if we are working on the service requests and then we have different support, like, we're chasing the sun. So support hands off the ticket to the next time zone. A lot of times on that handoff, there's loss of context. So
yeah,
the person who was working on the ticket has all the research that they've done and they know where they're at, but then they go off and it goes to the next person that's on support, and then they have to try to piece together what that previous person did and understand exactly what's going on. So it takes them a while to figure out that context and then start to apply their
Yeah.
rationale to it, right? And so there,
But
go ahead, Dan.
it's exactly that problem, right? So when we think about that research, so let's say you're handing off, or I'm handing off to you, right?
Yeah.
It would follow the sun in this particular case. This is where really decent process for service teams can make a difference. All of the knowledge that I'm going to put, I have to enrich into the ticket. I can't just pass over in voice chat to you.
Right.
I have to enrich the ticket, right? So whether that's maybe I've connected to the CRM and an automation has said, oh, I can recognize this customer account with this customer account, I'm going to link them, right? That is enriching the ticket. Or whether I've gone into Google and I've searched a problem or a knowledge base and I've auto linked all the pages. That is by enriching the ticket with the additional research, by providing, here's the steps that I've already done. When I hand that ticket off to you, even if I hadn't, and we hadn't done maybe like a warm active handover and it was cold, you could ask Rovo in this particular case to say like, hey, summarize what's gone on. What did Dan do? Tell me what would the next steps logically be for you, because you've received that information. So that's a real key thing about making sure that we are providing every step we've done, the investigative things into the ticket and making it searchable for the next person.
The cool thing about Rovo and creating a service desk agent from that perspective is that you can literally, create commands, or you can create the process to say, hey, summarize what we've done to make it available for Dan, who's coming online. And so there's literally no loss of context from what's been worked on versus now we have to catch up on seeing where we're at, kind of thing. So it's immediately going into, let's keep resolving the problem.
Yeah. But automation, again, if the task is simple enough, you could just hand it off. Here's a run book. Go follow it. Go do it. Go action it. Only come back to me with a problem, but provide me the information. I said about identifying maybe contact information, right? So key thing here, give Rovo the ability, the skills, they do exist. Maybe, for example, if you've got Salesforce and Jira, if a ticket gets raised here, ask Rovo to automatically attach the right customer account and provide that detail. So again, you've got the context. Who's the internal stakeholder for this person? What kind of support conversations do we need to be having? What's their current contracts? Are they in? Are they out? These are the values that kind of automation can bring to remove the context switching, but also, again, continue to enrich that ticket that we've spoken about.
100%. I mean, I think, we haven't scratched the surface of what Rovo can do from a service management perspective. And
No.
I need to block off some focus time, like we said, so I can go and bang around Rovo from that perspective. Yeah, so we have already talked about this a little bit, but we'll emphasize this point again as far as knowledge-based information, that it is most beneficial if it is standardized and written in such a way that it is easily accessible and easily findable and easily understood by humans and AI, right? So we want to make sure it is maximum findability from the AI perspective. And we need to make sure that when we're creating these documents and this knowledge bases that we're answering questions like who's going to need this and how will they find it, right? So in this case, it could be a human and or the AI that needs to come through and find the information in that knowledge base. So this, consistent structure will make it easier and faster for AI to scan through it and find exactly what it needs. So again, I think placing emphasis on, and we said earlier, it's easier said than done, is getting your data and your knowledge bases that you're going to be deploying in your automations in a standard and a templatized way.
Yeah. I think some of the things that I used to do some of the consultants with some of the customers that I did that were kind of looking at knowledge, right? And this was still on DC and server days, right? So this is not a new concept, but the idea was that they didn't have a structure at all to their information. They were completely fresh to this idea or wanted to have a new fresh idea. So we mind mapped it, right? So we said, okay, what are all the things that you do, right? Let's start with the high level things. So they gave me 4 or 5 high level ideas that they worked on. And I think I've told this story before in last season, but so they worked on that. Then they said, okay, well, here's all the substructures for all of those 5. And all of a sudden, they're at 3 levels deep. And I wouldn't have said gone any further, but that's when they started to recognize the links and the patterns between the different areas and branches of this mind map.
Yeah.
And that was a really powerful exercise, because now what they had is a structure they could work from. They could have 3 levels, each for the different areas of the practice that they ran, and then they could easily link, because then they had their own label structure, right? They were able to add labels and context and the metadata that we spoke about last week to the pages. They enriched their content from that mind map.
Yeah, and I think, at least from my perspective, the overall point here is that knowledge used to be static, right? It used to be just sitting there and we would access it whenever. Knowledge is now becoming way more dynamic, right?
Yes.
So it's actively being put into automations, into workflow. So these, we need, and it pulled in when it's needed. So we've gone from passive data to active data, right? So now that's why we need these consistent structures.
Exactly that. But it's about, let's say a document is then presented. So an old static page kind of reborn into its new meaning. This is when you could say, if you're having a chat with Rovo, for example, and say, hey, we need to update that page. It's kind of right, but it's missing 0.56. Let's push that in there. Let's add those new data. You're continuing to provide that feedback back. Automation will, like Rovo is actually good enough to kind of recognize those patterns and auto suggest them now, but that's where it comes down to process, which is if you're being suggested those things, let's push that into practice. Let's spend a day, an hour a week, a day a week, making sure that our content is good, because then by having a structure, by having a uniform style in our templates, so how-tos and troubleshooting and run books all follow the exact same structure. Even if you went to look, you can scan it quicker. But think about now AI ingesting that. It knows exactly where to find the run book version, who to speak to, key stakeholders, where does this environment live? Like, those are all the key questions which I can now pull information from.
100%, man. Totally agree.
Awesome. So we've already spoken about how like AI can kind of really help you, and especially with Rovo and the different examples. But we kind of need to now measure some success. So what can we kind of do around maybe, or what are the challenges with traditional metrics, and kind of how can we now see some of the new satisfying signals?
Yeah. So, I think traditionally we kind of look at metrics like, hey, how many tickets were closed? How many, did we meet our SLAs kind of thing? And those are great, but again, those can kind of be gamed if we needed to. So, it's like, let's figure out metrics that apply to the overall process, right? So how long does this ticket take to go through resolution, right? How many times did we have to hand this off to a separate individual versus having AI help automate it, right? Time spent in different activities. Did we have to do some research for this ticket, and how long did it take, based on utilizing AI or Rovo to pull us in versus what we used to have to do? And then probably one of the easiest ones is that if you have a service desk agent and a knowledge base linked up to it, were we able to self-serve some of our service desk tickets, right? Where we instead of kind of active deflection, we're able to deflect those into a self-service action versus creating a full ticket on and then having to work through that whole ticket kind of thing.
Exactly. But I think when those cycle time metrics that you pulled out, so how long does it take you to move from this one to this one? How many times was something either escalated or team bounced? Those are some really basic but really key factors into that. Like you said, how often did you have to look up information into the knowledge base? First of all, Rovo can help tell you all of that, because again, custom field data, history data, whatever it might be. But also to last week's point, which is the implicit information. How happy and or frustrated were you having to search that? how happy or frustrated was the customer about how long it might have taken to resolve said issue. These are then more satisfying signals that you might have a problem, or your team is having to go through burnout and having to deal with context switching, that you can actually kind of provide. And then even still, are your team finding or having to find workarounds because your knowledge or your information is so siloed? These are really key factors to consider.
Yeah, totally. And like we talked about in the last episode, for context, like the implicit context of, is the customer, are they frustrated? Are they happy? Did we have to escalate that because of their frustration? And if we didn't, if that trend has gone down, we know that we're actually
Mm.
hitting some metrics that are, impacting our flow improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. So, thank you very much for another great episode. I think we've learned basically that context switching is extremely expensive. Tool silos is going to always be a problem in that, but AI can, if you centralize the knowledge or allow it, is going to be able to provide you the right information at the right time to hopefully reduce that kind of effort.
Correct. And now it's going to take me 23 minutes to figure out what to do next.
Exactly. Well, it's perfect time for an Englishman to go get a cup of tea. But thank you very much for today's episode, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.